150 years ago, the Red River War tore through our land, the southern Great Plains of North America. It forever altered lives, altered destinies, recast cultures. The very landscape itself was reshaped, and history was changed forever. I am Andy Furnick, a filmmaker, native of the West Texas Panhandle. I am with Ada Lester to explore undertold stories of the Red River War. And I tell you, if you could sit across from her and see all of the light and just beauty that is effulgent in her countenance, you would be left utterly speechless as well. So maybe that's not very helpful in a podcast to be speechless. So maybe I'll just close my eyes and listen to you speak, Ada. Ada, tell us about yourself.
I am Ada Lester, born and raised in Wheeler County. I am the Wheeler County Historical Commission Chair and very passionate about the preservation and the recording of our history in this area.
This year, 150 years, we're celebrating, I should say honoring is more of an accurate term than celebrating, but we are honoring the Red River War. What is the Red River War?
The Red River War, the beginning of it was when the Civil War started. All the American troops, the Army, was essentially all there was as far as American troops that had been sent west to help protect the settlers who were trying to move and make little settlements in South Texas, which is down in from the ground, Fredericksburg. There were German settlements, there were Swedish settlements. They were constantly under attack by the Native Americans, and there was no protection for them. So the soldiers had all been called back to fight in the Civil War. That left nobody in the central United States. The Indians had come off the reservations. They were hungry. They wanted their way of life back because they were used to roaming. They didn't like being taught to farm and to stay in one place. They wanted to get out and do what they had always done. And they were trying really hard to get that lifestyle back. And there was no protection for the white settlers that had moved out here. So that was the beginning of the Red River War. That was what started everything. Was the United States government realized that there was a problem, an issue. That's when the military developed a plan that we were going to semicircle the renegades that have come off of the reservation, and we're going to drive them back on to the reservation, and we're going to keep them there. So they built an extra fort at the beginning, Fort Griffin. It was had been the last frontier fort built. They were all in central Texas coming north. And that's when they decided we need one more fort close to the Oklahoma Territory to make sure that they are kept on the reservation, and we will drive them to the reservation and put that fort there, and they will stay there this time.
There were a number of these forts then that most of them were built pre-Civil War, so antebellum, is that right? That they were established, as I heard you say, to provide a blanket of protection for settlers and settlement and people pushing west. So
but there was none on the Llano Estacado, which is the top of the Texas area, portions of the Oklahoma Panhandle, and then portions of New Mexico is Llano Estacado. And it was a major hunting ground for the Indian livelihood of the buffalo. And that was their main source of life, was the buffalo.
I imagine anytime your way of life is threatened, it awakens deep fear, deep reaction, deep emotions of every kind.
It does. Medicine Lodge was the treaty that was made and broken so severely with the Indians that was a major factor for the beginning of the Red River Wars, because it was not upheld by the United States government at all.
How did they break their promises?
The food supply was, I think, the most major thing that happened. It didn't happen. It was very sporadic, and when they did get a shipment of food in, it was not good quality flour and meal and there was never fresh produce or anything like that. It would always be just the basics of
bare bones scraps.
Yes, on a monthly basis. Every 30 days, they were to go into their agency. That was their government, per se. It was the people who were overseeing their needs, and these things were supposed to be there.
Okay.
And they were not. It was not what had been promised to them. Sugar and sugar, flour, meal, salt. Those are the things that come to mind that where they could use to make to supplement what they were supposed to be raising in the form of gardens and farming things. It was to supplement that. They were not happy not being able to roam and to hunt, because in what I have read, the quail, the prairie chicken, the fishing, it was soon depleted for this many people in this small of an area. Actually, that Oklahoma is not a huge state, and that was the area that they were given to survive on, and this was thousands of people. Goodness, how in the world they expected them to survive? I don't know. I don't understand the reasoning there. I just do not. I can't comprehend that at all. The Native American people, this had been their land for thousands of years. To come and go and migrate and go, be wherever they felt like they wanted to be. And this Llano Estacado here in the Texas Panhandle was the last hunting grounds left for them, for their survival, that the buffalo would migrate to on a yearly basis. Would they find slaughtered buffalo rotting on the ground everywhere? The buffalo hunters would take what they could sell, and that would be the tongue and the hump from the buffalo's neck and the hide, and that was the prize parts of the buffalo that the back east and in Europe there was a market for those items. So,
and the rest
was left on the prairie to rot. And there's a lot of places you read where the white bones would sparkle in the sunlight of the rotted buffalo bones. They were everywhere, just piles and piles of bones. So
they're wiping them out.
They were totally wiping out.
Wanton destruction everywhere.
Yes.
And now they can't feed their families.
Yes.
And why the military did nothing to enforce the buffalo hunters? They didn't say, excuse me, you guys are crossing the river south. We said we wouldn't allow that. They did nothing.
Did nothing. Totally turned their head.
And so here comes the buffalo hunters wiping out buffalo. This is what takes us to the Red River War. When the government failed to enforce the promises of Medicine Lodge, how did the Native Americans react?
They were going to every tribe, all of their enemies that they had. Of course, they were fighting among themselves a lot. They were going all around the country trying to recruit a group that would band together to go out and would wipe out these buffalo hunters once and for all and get them off of the Llano Estacado, make them go back north east, wherever, but get them out of here. So that was their purpose.
Our purpose today is not a comprehensive understanding and exposition of the Red River War or even the battles at Adobe Walls. We are here to explore some of the overlooked and almost forgotten characters and stories relevant to Adobe Walls and the Red River War, particularly pertinent to present-day Wheeler, Texas, and surrounding counties. Ada, earlier you mentioned to me one of these buffalo hunters, of whom I had never even heard a peep, Emmanuel Dubbs. Who was Emmanuel Dubbs?
Emmanuel Dubbs was a buffalo hunter. He had organized a hunting party out of Dodge City, Kansas. His main partner's last name was Peters. They have come across the Arkansas River. They have come down to hunt. They have heard of a large herd that is south of the Adobe Walls area. And Adobe Walls is known to every buffalo hunter in Dodge City, Kansas, because there was an Adobe Walls 1 that was apparently built by a group of Mexican sheep herders that were in there for a while. It was in all these crumbling Adobe Walls buildings when the buffalo hunting started big time in the Panhandle area. And so they were coming down. They were going to rebuild these structures, and that was going to be their headquarters and their trading post to bring supplies in for them. So they would have a place for their hides to be marketed and shipped out and them to bring into from their hunting expeditions. So he has they buffalo hunting crew that he has taken out, and he is in Emmanuel Dubbs. And they are camped out. They get up one morning, and their horses have all disappeared. They had them staked out. They had kind of got lax with their security outlook because they had not seen any signs of Indians. They thought they were good in the area they were hunting in. And his was the only horse that was left, and because he had him stake close to him where he was sleeping. So he tells the crew, he said, "You guys stay here. I am going to see if they just haven't roamed off during the night, somehow got loose, and I'll be back in a while." Well, after surveying the area horseback, he sees where they have been driven off. Everything is showing signs what direction they have gone. And he keeps riding and following this trail until he catches up with them, and he sees that there is this band of Indians, and here are all of their horses and their livestock that they have with them for their meat supply for this hunting trip. So he starts back to camp, and there is a huge ridge above where they are camped out that is kind of a lookout point. So he thinks, well, maybe I better go up there and just survey the area before I go back down to camp. And he looks down at his camp, and he can only see just one large glob. There was no movement, there was no motion. He said he couldn't tell what this glob was, but he said it appeared to be over the tongue of one of the wagons that was in the campsite area. So he said he crawled back to his horse and eased his horse down that ridge, that embankment that he was up on, and to where he could get a better sight. And here was all of his men had been murdered. They were naked. They had been mutilated. He said he had never seen a more horrific sight in his life. Horseback, he's trying to get back to Adobe Walls to tell everybody there, they are in the area. He is probably, from the way he described it, he was on the Canadian River. They were camped I think he said he's 17 miles, something like that. He said he was running his horse just as hard as his horse would go. And he finally just gave out on him. His horse stumbled, fell, and there was no getting up. And he still had 5 miles left to get to Adobe Walls. And so he unsaddled him, bridled him, and he put the saddle on his back, and he walked the rest of the way into Adobe Walls. And he said him beating on the door of the main housing where most of them were sleeping. He knew where that was.
A lodge of some sort.
It was a barn or some kind of a dwelling that they had put together there. And he said the German brothers' wagon was out in the yard, and he knew they were asleep underneath their wagon.
Scheidler or something,
Scheidler
was it? Scheidler brothers?
Yes. And he said just as they got the door open, he could hear the yells of the Indians coming. So he said, I think that my pounding on the door and getting everybody up and awake may have helped save our lives. And this was his story of Adobe Walls.
I have not heard that at all. And so he claims that he rolls into camp literally minutes before the attack.
Yes.
Gracious. So he walked all night once his horse gave out. He walked during the night.
Yes.
Because the attack comes first thing in the morning, even before the rooster crows.
And said, all he had to go by and walking in the dark was the stars in heaven, and he knew by the stars what direction to go keep aiming for, and that's how he managed to stumble into camp. And I know this is totally different from the other stories we've heard about Adobe Walls, but this was Emmanuel Dubbs, who later became the first judge in the top of Texas Panhandle area for Wheeler County. He wasn't at the meeting that elected him judge, but he found out in about 24 hours he is the judge.
By the way, Ada Lester, you're judge now. I hope you don't mind, and I don't care if you do mind, but you're judge now. There you go. We elected you. Wow.
But
what do you think? Emmanuel Dubbs, huh?
Emmanuel Dubbs, yes. And this is his story of Adobe Walls.
My goodness. I've never heard anyone tell that story as to those events that coincide with the very morning of the attack.
Right.
That would be a pertinent detail, and I wonder why. I guess some people claim that there was this lodge pole that cracked and woke everybody up. If they're thinking about a crack, sounds like Emmanuel Dubbs might have been cracking his knuckles on the door a few times, getting him up.
According to his story, he was.
Yeah, that lucid state between sleep and awake, I hear all kinds of things that I don't know if I'm half dreaming or half are really happening. So maybe they're imagining as he's bloodying his knuckles on the door saying, get your butts out of bed. We got problems,
Right. And this is the writing that he did for a collection of stories of events that were taking place in our area here in the Texas Panhandle and the settlement of the Panhandle.
Adobe Walls is hailed as the opening of the Red River War. This is the first skirmish. This is the first engagement. What are the other engagements? You've mentioned there is Battle of Adobe Walls, and total there are 8?
Yes, there were 8 major battles. I think there was maybe 14 different skirmishes that took place, but there were 8 major battles that were fought that got the peace under control, and the Native Americans moved back onto reservation where the white settlers could come in and feel at ease in making a claim on land and setting up a home.
Speaking of settlers feeling at ease, you've told me about Kate Pauley and a rather unexpected encounter with a Native American war party not far from where we are now in Mobeetie, Texas. Who was Kate Pauley?
Kate Pauley was the wife of a Dr. Pauley that had served in the Civil War as a medical personnel. And he, let's see, how did they put it? He couldn't do surgeries. He could like treat a cold. He could treat different fevers and things like that.
A general practitioner, a general physician, not a surgeon, though. Okay.
Yeah. So he also was a veterinarian. So he was a combination of both a doctor and a veterinarian, and they had moved into the Texas Panhandle area into what is now Lipscomb County. Very top, we call it the armpit of Oklahoma, where it's right the county where the arm comes across the top of Texas Panhandle. So.
I'd not heard that, but that's how fitting. Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, he was away on a house call, and Mrs. Polly is home by herself, and she has 2 daughters, little girls. Not very old. I think they are supposedly like 3 and maybe 10, something like that, little girls. But anyway, she's taking care of the stock. They have milk cows. They have some horses. They have a few head of just regular cattle. And while he's away, she is doing everything, keeping the household going. And she looks out one morning, and there are, she says, between 400 and 500 Indians just surrounding the house. And she steps out to see what's happening, what's going on, and they indicate that they are hungry, that they want to eat. And she has nothing but a barrel of flour and some milk. That's all she has. So she starts stirring flour and milk and making pancakes on her griddle, on her little wood stove in her kitchen. And this is a family story that has been passed down through the years. And she feeds all of these, and she said they line up and they just come through her house in a line and then pick the pancakes up off of the griddle and walk out and get back in line again. And she does this all day long. And if she stops to stir up another batch, then they start pinching her on her arms and her back, get back to cooking again is what they're trying to insist that she do. And she says this is her family, a granddaughter whose mother was one of the daughters that of Mrs. Polly's that had related this story through the years, said that toward the end of the day, she was running out of flour. Her little girl, the youngest one, was still nursing. She hadn't fed her all day. She had kept her head in the flour barrel all day. And she unties her apron. She walks outside and she sits down on a cottonwood log and starts nursing her baby. And they start pinching her again and pointing toward the kitchen and inside the cabin. And they said that she raised one hand and drew a finger across her neck, indicated she would die before she would cook another pancake. And she said they really thought that what saved her life and the little girl's life was the fact that they knew Mr. Polly was a physician, and he had also ministered doctor treatment to some of the different Indian tribes that were in the area. And that is probably what saved her and the little girl's life, was that some of them knew her husband and knew that he was a good man. And said that when they left, they drove off all the milk cows with them. They took them with them.
Oh, really? They just... Thank you. These are ours now.
Yeah, we took them and said the next morning the milk cows were all back in the yard. So they either lost them or they decided we'll let them go back.
They were
home.
Like, we need flour if we're going to make pancakes. So milk does us no good without the barrel of flour.
Well, they needed that barrel of flour for the pancakes.
Maybe that's what they took them. They didn't want milk. They just wanted pancakes. They were like, what was that? So this has to be one of the first pancake suppers or pancake breakfasts on
in the Panhandle.
In the Panhandle.
It had to be.
No raffle tickets sold, no fundraiser, no door to door. Come join our pancake breakfast.
Nobody there with a bucket and jingling the change in it to make noise and say, make a donation.
Well, I guess it was door to door, wasn't it? You had 400 plus natives showing up at one door at the same time.
So anyway, they really think that this was a band of Quanah's people he was contacting during this time about gathering together and fighting the white people who were taking their land and destroying the buffalo, and the beginning of the Red River War type situation.
What indications did they have? What are the clues that caused them to believe this was Quanah's band?
Because of all of the different tribes that were involved in this.
Oh, that makes sense.
For one thing, and the other thing was the time period that this supposedly took place. I know that even the family are in disagreement about exactly when all of this took place in Lipscomb County.
What about location as well?
Yes, the Adobe walls is in the top of the Panhandle on the western side, and Lipscomb County's top of the Panhandle on the eastern side. And when they left, they were headed in a westerly direction.
Okay, so this is just we say a few miles apart, but in the Texas Panhandle, a few miles, isn't that far. As it could be several miles, but
they could have just been in the gathering stages. But it was really uncommon to see that many different tribes of Native Americans all in one group.
Normally, not always the best of friends under circumstances before the Red River War, but at the Red River War, coming together then.
Yes, they came together because they wanted what we know as the Texas Panhandle. This was their hunting grounds, and they knew if they lost it, they were gone as in control of any of the American lands.
So
he spent 2 years, according to one of the articles I've read, doing this, gathering.
He and Nishatai together spent a couple of years even gathering forces.
Going to the different tribes and telling their story of, this is what is happening. This is what we want to stop to.
Soliciting.
This is,
recruitment. Yes.
Right.
And pancakes.
And pancakes.
Why wouldn't you? Right?
I don't think there was any maple syrup, but there may have been some butter.
This stop was just a family ranch. The Kate Polly's and Dr. Polly's. This was a family ranch. Their homestead,
it was a family ranch. There's two different sources of where it was. One source says it was on Commission Creek in Lipscomb, Hemphill County. Just on the edge of Lipscomb and Hemphill County. The other one says it was, what did I tell you?
Mission Creek? Or was it Commission?
Mission and Commission.
Commission Creek and then Mission Creek, which are two verifiable geographic locations within Lipscomb and Hemphill counties. Now, they... were there also records of them actually having a homestead at both locations?
Yes.
Okay, so they even moved. So they lived in both places. We just don't know at which location it happened.
That's true.
Okay. And they're not that far apart anyway. Again, in relative West Texas plains
in our area
measurement,
when
yes.
it's 100 miles anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. And it was just a homestead. I heard it was there was like it served as a
Stage station.
a stage station as well.
Right. It was in both places, on Mission Creek and on Commissions Creek. They had this stage station. But when the stage, it was Mission Creek first, and then when the stage route or the supply route changed coming out of Fort Supply down to Fort Elliott, it moved over to the other creek. I don't know. The Commission Creek, I think, is where it was last. But after they had the Indian scare, they went back to Dodge City and stayed for a while before they came back and said...
They gathered some nerves again. They were like, woo!
Oh, yeah. I think Miss
goodness.
Polly probably had all of the Indian wars she wanted.
That was war enough, feeding...
Yes.
400 and how many pancakes per each, One is one pancake enough for you ever? No. If I'm having a pancake supper, to me means I got to at least have like 4 or 5.
Well, at least, yeah.
But it wasn't always brunch and garden parties at Kate Polly's. You told me a little about 2 unidentified girl captives who were recovered by the military and then left at the Polly's Ranch and Stage Station.
While they were running the stage station, they were brought by the military. They could not speak, they would not speak or communicate in English with Mrs. Polly. They were in shreds of clothing and tatters. Apparently, these little girls had splitters driven under their fingernails and set afire and under their eyelids and burned. They had obviously been tortured and were extremely malnourished, according to Mrs. Polly and her family's accounting of this incident. And the military personnel that had brought them in were needing to move on to another location, so they left them with Mr. and Miss Polly so that they would be cared for and could be put on the next stage coming through that would take them to the Darlington agency to where they needed to stay. But Mrs. Polly said that they sat in a corner. They would not look at anybody, and she had given them a quilt to cover themselves with, and they pulled that quilt over their head, and they wouldn't even peek out from under it. So she slid plates of food under the quilt, and she said they ate with their hands. They didn't appear to recognize what a spoon and fork was for, but they did eat, that they were very hungry, and she said they're very malnourished little girls. And she did manage to make one of them some clothing to cover herself. So when she left the Polly station, she at least had on a little dress when she left.
She showed up then wearing nothing? She was
just in tatters. Just tatters was what the description of the family story.
Was there? You were telling me about some other officer had made out of a
nightshirt.
Out of one of his nightshirts had made some makeshift covering
for her. Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's what I feel like they were bound for the Comanchero Canyon of Tears, South Kitty
interesting.
Way. I really think that.
Their movement
is straight south.
Straight south to
Kitty Quay is what I think.
I've never heard anyone say that before, but that is a curious detail.
That is my thoughts.
That makes me think. That makes me think.
Because that is the same time period all of that kind of trade was going on in that area there, and at Tascosa. And Tascosa had become a little more westernized by that time with white men. the sheep herders had gone back to New Mexico, pretty well run out of that area by the cattlemen, and the sheep were not appreciated in the Texas Panhandle by the ranchers at all. So I think so. I really feel like that's where the Indians were headed with those little girls.
With the girls. Fascinating. I had not even considered that. But this is why your voice is so important to the discussions and the groups that are talking today about the Red River War, is because it takes everyone sharing the details and the stories that they know and the research they've done to fill in all of those pieces. Now, the Red River War, how long did it last?
Just 1 year.
Just 1 year.
1 year. Yeah. By 1875, everything was settled.
Done and dusted.
Yeah, that's right.
That was it.
Indians were back on the reservation. It's my understanding after Fort Elliott was built, there was a couple of scares, but they turned out to be fabricated stories that got people alarmed and that they weren't true. But anyway, when Quanah Parker was the last group to come in with the Quahati tribe that he had formed, that was the end. They gave totally up. This was it. They were through fighting the Red River War, which was the beginning of the end.
Please join us in person in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Red River War on August 30th, 2024, 10 a.m. at Palo Duro Canyon. The next engagement is the Battle of Red River, also known as the First Battle of Palo Duro. For more detailed information on this and other upcoming events, please contact Chris Larson with the Frontier Regiment of the High Plains. frontierregiment@gmail.com. That's frontierregiment@gmail.com.
I am excited about going. I am to all of them. This is such a great part of our history.
This program has been brought to you by the Wheeler County Historical Commission and the Frontier Regiment of the High Plains.